The year 1680 began for me at Bristol, in the quiet of an unremarkable household. I remember salt air most clearly, the world soft and unhurried around me, the days unfolding slowly. You need not follow every word that follows. Let your eyes close whenever they wish, and simply rest here with me as the story unfolds. The birth that marked my arrival was a small thing, unnoticed by the great tides of history. I grew up where the creaking timbers of the docks sang their endless, low song against the harbor fog. My earliest memories are woven from the scent of tar and rope, a sharp, resinous smell that clung to the wool of my father's coat. We lived in a port city childhood where the rhythm of the sea dictated the pace of every breath. The cobblestones were always damp, reflecting the pale light of a sky that rarely cleared completely. I watched the ships come and go, their sails billowing like heavy clouds, carrying men away to places I could only guess at. There was no fear in those days, only a deep, quiet curiosity about the horizon. The water lapped against the pilings with a steady, hypnotic rhythm that soothed the restless spirit of the town. I recall the feel of the rough wood under my small hands as I leaned over the railing, watching the gulls circle above the masts. The air was thick with the smell of drying kelp and the distant, rhythmic sound of hammers fixing hulls. It was a life of simple observations, of watching the light change on the water as the day wore on. The people around me moved with a deliberate slowness, their faces weathered by the wind and salt. There was a sense of permanence in the way the buildings stood against the elements, solid and enduring. I learned to read the weather in the way the clouds gathered over the harbor, predicting the storms before they broke. The world felt vast and full of possibility, yet entirely contained within the walls of this coastal town. The years passed with the gentle inevitability of the tide, bringing no sudden changes or dramatic turns. I grew taller, my voice deepened, but the essence of those early days remained unchanged. The salt air continued to fill my lungs, a constant companion that shaped the very texture of my being. I remember the sound of the church bell ringing out across the water, a clear note that cut through the morning mist. It was a sound that marked the passage of time, a reminder that life moved forward even in the stillness. The harbor was a place of work and rest, where the boundaries between the two blurred into a single, continuous flow. There is a specific fact that often surfaces in the quiet of memory, though it was unknown to me then. The first recorded mention of a man named Edward Teach in Bristol does not appear until decades later, in a ship's log from 1704, leaving the first 24 years of my life a blank space on the map. This silence was not empty, but filled with the unspoken moments of a boy growing up by the sea. The details of those years are lost, dissolved into the salt and the mist, leaving only the feeling of the place. I remember the texture of the ropes, the taste of the brine, and the sound of the waves. These are the anchors that hold me now, more real than any name or title. The light in the room shifts slowly as the day wears on, casting long shadows across the floorboards. A single candle flickers in a brass holder on the mantel, its flame steady and calm. The air smells faintly of beeswax and dried lavender that hangs in bundles from the ceiling beams. Outside the window, the distant sound of the sea can be heard as the tide rolls in and out with a steady and hypnotic rhythm. The walls are adorned with simple tapestries depicting scenes of rural life and harvest that bring a sense of calm to the interior space. A large map of the known world hangs on the far wall, showing the trade routes that connect England to the colonies and beyond. The map is drawn with care and precision, showing the coastlines and islands with a clarity that speaks of the importance of navigation. Dust motes dance in the shafts of light that enter the room, creating a slow and peaceful atmosphere that invites contemplation. The silence of the room is broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. This is a place of rest and reflection where the worries of the outside world are left at the door. The warmth of the fire provides a comforting presence that seems to wrap around anyone who sits in the room. It is in such a place that a young man might have dreamed of adventure and the vast unknown of the ocean beyond the horizon. The stillness of the room offers a moment of peace before the storm of a life at sea begins to unfold. My name was Edward Teach, born in the port city of Bristol, though the exact date of my birth is lost to the mist of memory. The sea was the only home I ever truly knew, a vast and indifferent mother that demanded everything and gave nothing in return. As a young man, I found my way to the decks of privateer ships serving under Captain Benjamin Hornigold during the War of the Spanish Succession. It was a time of chaos and opportunity, where the lines between soldier and outlaw blurred with the rising sun. We sailed the Caribbean, hunting Spanish galleons laden with silver and gold, driven by the promise of a share in the spoils. The discipline of the naval service was strict, yet it taught me the value of a well-oiled gun and the importance of a crew that could move as one. I learned the intricacies of navigation, the art of reading the stars and the currents, and the brutal reality of life at sea where a single mistake could mean death. Hornigold was a mentor who showed me that fear could be a weapon sharper than any blade. The ships we commanded were not merely vessels of wood and rope, but floating cities of ambition and survival. We moved through the water with a silent language of flags and the precise timing of maneuvers under the cover of darkness. The success of these endeavors depended on the skill of the sailors and the reliability of their equipment. My life was defined by action rather than creation, for survival was the primary objective and beauty was a secondary concern. The artifacts that remain from my time are primarily tools of trade and war rather than works of art. I operated within a world where the horizon was both a promise and a threat, a boundary that could hide a gale or a merchant ship. The transformation of a captured sloop into a vessel of my own power illustrated a capacity to repurpose existing structures for new and aggressive ends. This act of renaming and refitting was a declaration of identity and intent to the wider maritime community. The alliance I formed with other pirates showed a political acumen that complemented my naval skills. These relationships were forged through mutual benefit and the shared understanding of the risks involved in our trade. We were not a chaotic mob, but a network of men who understood the value of loyalty in a lawless world. The blockade of Charlestown stands as a testament to my strategic vision and my ability to execute complex plans. The inhabitants of the port faced a unified front that demanded their attention and their resources. The resolution of the ransom involved careful negotiation and the maintenance of a credible threat of violence. Throughout these events, the historical record remains silent on any personal artistic pursuits, for the focus of my life was the sea, the ship, and the crew that followed me. The quiet waters of the Outer Banks in the early 18th century reflected the pale light of a setting sun. Gentle waves lapped against the weathered hulls of abandoned fishing boats that rested on the sandy shore. Seagulls called softly to one another from the dunes, where the wind had shaped the grass into gentle ridges. The air smelled of salt spray and dried kelp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from a distant village. A single lantern flickered in the window of a small cottage, casting a warm, amber glow onto the darkening beach. The tide moved slowly, erasing footprints in the wet sand with a rhythmic and soothing sound. Clouds drifted lazily across the horizon, painted in soft shades of violet and gray by the fading daylight. The sea remained calm, its surface like polished glass, mirroring the stillness of the twilight sky. No ships disturbed the horizon, and the only movement came from the slow swaying of the tall grass in the breeze. This peaceful scene stood in stark contrast to the violent history that had unfolded in these same waters just years before. The silence of the coast offered a sense of enduring calm that persisted through the changing seasons. The legacy of that era faded as the British Empire tightened its grip on colonial trade routes. New laws were enacted to punish piracy more severely, and naval patrols became more frequent and organized. The golden age of piracy gradually gave way to a more regulated maritime environment under strict imperial control. My death served as a powerful symbol of the state's ability to project power into remote coastal regions. The narrative of the pirate king was eventually transformed into a cautionary tale for future generations. Historians continue to examine the available documents to separate fact from the embellishments of contemporary writers. The story remains a complex tapestry woven from historical truth and literary invention. It reflects the anxieties and hopes of a society grappling with the challenges of expansion and order. The memory of those turbulent years persists in the cultural imagination of the modern world. Scholars work diligently to uncover the true details hidden beneath layers of myth and legend. Their efforts ensure that the historical context is understood with clarity and precision for future readers. The study of this period provides valuable insights into the social and political dynamics of the early 18th century. It reveals how individuals navigated a world in flux, seeking opportunity amidst chaos and uncertainty. The historical record, though incomplete, offers a glimpse into the lives of those who lived on the margins of empire. Edward Teach, known to history as Blackbeard, cultivated a terrifying persona through a thick black beard and a menacing appearance. I wore this dark facial hair deliberately to instill fear in enemies and allies alike. My daily habits often involved smoking a pipe while standing on the deck of my ship. I would light slow, burning fuses under my hat to create a halo of smoke that made me look like a demon rising from the depths. The image of the pirate with the burning fuse became a staple of popular culture and visual art. This iconography served to distinguish me from other figures of the era and to cement my place in history. The actual man, however, was likely more concerned with the weather and the condition of my sails than with my public image. The ships I commanded were constantly battered by the relentless Atlantic, their timbers groaning under the strain of every storm. We navigated through treacherous sands and hidden dangers that could swallow a vessel whole in a matter of minutes. The final battle between myself and Lieutenant Robert Maynard remains a subject of historical fascination and scholarly debate. During the battle, I lured the royal sloops onto a sandbar where they temporarily ran aground. My ship then unleashed a broadside with 8 cannons against Maynard's vessels after they ran aground. Despite this tactical advantage, the Royal Navy forces eventually overwhelmed the crew in a fierce hand-to-hand struggle. The provided text does not contain information regarding the specific fate of my headless body after the battle at Ocracoke Inlet. Some accounts suggest my body was thrown into the water while my head was displayed as a warning to other potential criminals. Bayless C. Brooks is a maritime and colonial historian based in North Carolina who has studied these events in depth. He published an article in 2015 titled Born in Jamaica, of very credible parentage, which offers new perspectives on my origins. The historical record remains fragmented due to the scarcity of primary sources from my own perspective. Most information relies on the testimonies of captured pirates or the reports of naval officers. The quiet waters off the coast of North. The name Teach belonged to the man before the legend ever took shape, a quiet signature on a logbook in the early days. I remember the shift when the ordinary sailor became the figure that made governors tremble in their chairs. It began not with a roar, but with a deliberate silence and a change in the way I carried myself. The world had grown weary of the War of the Spanish Succession, leaving thousands of men without work and without purpose on the chaotic shores of the Atlantic. The British Empire stretched too thin across the distant colonies, its governors lacking the ships or the will to patrol the shallow, winding coastlines of the Carolinas. This emptiness became my canvas, a void where I could paint a new identity with the dark strokes of fear. I chose to wear a beard that I let grow wild and thick, weaving slow burning fuses into the dark hair that framed my face. When I stepped onto the deck in the dim light, the smoke curling from my beard created a halo of terror that no man could ignore. It was a simple trick of the trade, a piece of theater performed for an audience of terrified merchants and rival captains. The scent of the burning matches mixed with the salt and the tar, a pungent odor that announced my arrival before I even spoke a word. I took command of a French slave ship, a vessel that had once carried human cargo across the deadly Middle Passage. The wood was sound, the rigging strong, and I renamed her the Queen Anne's Revenge. This renaming was not merely a change of title, but a declaration of intent, a way to sever the past and forge a new legacy in the name of a dead queen. The ship became my moving fortress, a place where I could exercise a power that the law could not touch. My crew grew as the legend grew, drawn to the promise of gold and the safety of a captain who seemed to walk among the dead. We sailed together, a fleet of shadows that struck the trade routes with sudden violence and vanished into the horizon. The blockade of Charlestown was the moment the myth solidified into something solid and undeniable. I held the town in my grip, taking hostages and demanding medicine for my men, showing that I could reach even into the heart of the colonies. The fear I inspired was a tool, sharp and effective, used to keep the world at bay. The silence of the archives regarding my personal life is a deep and heavy thing. I look back now and see only fragments, scattered documents that fail to capture the texture of my days or the shape of my thoughts. Some texts do not mention the exact date or the specific location where I first joined Hornigold's crew, leaving that beginning to the imagination of the reader. Other sources fail to detail the key relationships that shaped the man behind the beard, leaving the emotional landscape of my life blank. The uncertainty surrounding these details adds to the enigmatic nature of the story, allowing the mind to fill the gaps with quiet speculation. Scholars continue to piece together the fragments from ship logs and official reports, trying to find the man in the record. The silence of the library at night offered different kind of peace for those studying these old records. Dust motes danced in the beam of a single candle that illuminated a weathered map on the desk. The paper was yellowed with age, its edges frayed from years of careful handling. Ink stains marked the coastline where the pirate ships once sailed. The smell of old leather and parchment filled the air, a scent that spoke of centuries past. A heavy book lay open nearby, its pages filled with the handwritten notes of a long-dead scholar. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional scratch of a quill on paper. This stillness allowed the mind to wander through the turbulent history of the seas. The stories of men like Teach seemed to fade into the background of the quiet room. The past became a distant dream, accessible only through the written word. I found no solace in domestic life, nor did I seek the comfort of a family or a home. The records are silent on my personal struggles, offering no clear picture of the relationships that might have anchored me to the earth. He may have looked at the stars and wondered if he would ever find rest, but the text does not describe any such moments of introspection. The fear he inspired in others likely kept true companionship at a distance, leaving him to walk the plank of his own reputation. He lived a life defined by movement and the constant threat of violence, where even moments of peace were shadowed by the knowledge of what was coming. The pardon he sought in Bath offered only a temporary reprieve from his destiny, a brief pause before the final act. He could not escape the pull of the ocean that had claimed him so completely. The actual man was likely more concerned with the weather and the condition of his sails than with the public image he projected. The ships he commanded were the primary canvases of his career, painted with the smoke of battle and the salt of the ocean. The crew members were the brushstrokes that brought his plans to life through their collective effort and discipline. The legacy of the captain endures not through his own artistic output, but through the stories told about him. These narratives have been shaped by the fears and fantasies of generations of readers and viewers. The historical facts provide a foundation, but the artistic development belongs to those who came after him. The silence of the archives regarding his personal creativity allows the imagination to fill the void with vivid and varied images. The true measure of his development lies in the evolution of his command and the expansion of his influence. From a privateer to a captain of a large fleet, his journey was one of increasing responsibility and complexity. The Queen Anne's Revenge served as the pinnacle of this development, representing the height of his power and reach. The blockade of Charlestown marked the moment when his influence extended beyond the high seas to the shores of the colonies. The ransom of the inhabitants demonstrated his ability to leverage his power for tangible gain. These actions defined his career and shaped the historical memory of his time. The artistic interpretations that followed sought to capture the essence of these events in visual form. They translated the chaos of the sea and the tension of the blockade into static images for the viewer. The result is a rich tapestry of legend that continues to evolve with each new retelling. The historical Edward Teach remains a figure of mystery, his personal artistic life lost to the passage of time. The ships he sailed and the battles he fought are the only true records of his development. These events were recorded in the logs of other captains and the reports of colonial officials. The silence regarding his inner life is a constant feature of historical study. Historians can only infer his feelings from the actions he took during his brief career. He appeared to find solace in the chaos of the sea rather than in domestic life. The text does not describe Blackbeard's personal life in any meaningful detail. This gap in knowledge allows the imagination to fill the void with quiet speculation. He may have looked at the stars and wondered if he would ever find rest. The uncertainty of his fate was a burden he carried until the very end. The candlelight flickered softly against the rough hewn wooden walls of a small colonial cabin in Bath. Dust motes danced slowly in the single beam of light that pierced the heavy shutters. A simple wooden table held a clay pipe and a half-empty tankard of ale. The air smelled faintly of salt, old timber, and the lingering smoke of tobacco. Outside, the gentle lapping of water against the shore provided a rhythmic, soothing sound. Shadows stretched long across the floorboards as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. A woven rug lay worn and soft beneath the feet of anyone who entered the room. The silence of the evening settled deeply, wrapping the space in a warm, protective blanket. Time seemed to lose its urgency in this quiet corner of the world. The stillness invited the mind to drift away from the noise of the day. The final battle with Maynard concluded, a career defined by boldness and notoriety, ending the transformation that had begun so many years before. The transition to the adventure marked the beginning of the end for the famous pirate. The salt air grew thick and heavy as we gathered off the coast of Charlestown, a unified front rising from the gray mist, like a dark cloud. I stood on the quarterdeck of the Queen Anne's Revenge, feeling the vibration of 40 guns beneath my boots, each one a promise of force. The sloop was a floating fortress, transformed from a French slave ship into a vessel of our own making, its hull reinforced and its heart beating with the rhythm of 300 men. We moved with a silent precision that only comes from long practice, the flags snapping in the wind to signal our formation without a single word spoken. The other captains joined our line, a loose confederation bound by the shared understanding of risk and the promise of plunder. Our combined strength made us a formidable shadow against the horizon, capable of challenging the naval power of the empire that sought to crush us. The blockade was not merely a show of force, but a complex maneuver requiring the skill of every sailor and the reliability of every rope and sail. We waited for the morning light to reveal the port, its masts rising like a forest of dead trees against the pale sky. The inhabitants of the town faced a wall of iron and wood that demanded their attention and their resources. There was no rush, no panic in our movements, only the steady, deliberate pace of men who knew exactly what they intended to do. The silence between our ships was filled with the creak of timber and the soft lapping of water against the hulls, a sound that spoke of patience and inevitable action. We held the shipping lanes with a grip that could not be loosened, cutting off the flow of trade and commerce until the town itself began to tremble. The air smelled of wood smoke from the distant village, mixed with the sharp tang of brine and the faint scent of fear that drifted from the shore. I watched the small boats moving nervously in the harbor, their crews aware of the threat that loomed just beyond the breakwater. The negotiation began not with a shout, but with the sending of a small boat, its occupants trembling as they approached the flagship. They carried the demands of the town, a plea for mercy wrapped in the language of commerce and ransom. I listened to their words, my face a mask of calm, while the crew behind me stood ready to unleash the fury of our cannons if the terms were not met. The resolution of the ransom involved careful calculation and the maintenance of a credible threat of violence that never needed to be fully realized. The town paid, and we took our share, the gold and silver adding to the wealth that had already made us legends in the eyes of the mariners. It was a successful operation, a testament to the strategic vision that had brought us together and the ability to execute complex plans under pressure. The alliance held firm through the transaction, the bonds of mutual benefit keeping the greed and suspicion at bay for a little while longer. We had shown the world that we could organize and lead, that we were more than a collection of outlaws, but a force of nature that could not be ignored. The Queen Anne's Revenge sat heavy in the water, her 40 guns a silent declaration of our power and intent. The transformation of the ship from a merchant vessel to a war machine had been a labor of necessity and ingenuity, a repurposing of structure for new and aggressive ends. This act of renaming and refitting was a statement of identity to the wider maritime community, a signal that we were here to stay. The historical record remains silent on any personal artistic pursuits of mine, for my life was defined by action rather than creation. I operated within a world where survival was the primary objective and beauty was a secondary concern, found only in the perfection of a well-timed maneuver. The artifacts that remain from that time are primarily tools of trade and war, the ropes and cannons that kept us alive and free. The sloop served as a mobile base for our operations and a symbol of our growing power, a place where we could rest and plan our next move. The alliance we formed with other pirates showed a political acumen that complemented our naval skills, a network of men who understood the risks involved in our trade. These relationships were forged in the fires of shared danger and the promise of a shared future, however fleeting it might be. The blockade of Charlestown stands as a testament to this strategic vision and the ability to coordinate complex plans with precision. The inhabitants of the port faced a unified front that demanded their attention and their resources, a front that did not break until the ransom was paid. The resolution of the ransom involved careful negotiation and the maintenance of a credible threat of violence that kept the town in check. Throughout these events, the focus of my life remained the sea, the ship, and the crew that followed me into the unknown. The artistic representations of my life emerged long after my death and were shaped by the needs of storytellers who sought drama over truth. These later depictions often emphasized the dramatic elements of my legend over the mundane details of my daily existence, painting a picture of a man who was more myth than flesh. The image of the pirate with the burning fuse became a staple of popular culture and visual art, a symbol of terror that endured for centuries. This iconography served to distinguish me from other figures of the era and to cement my place in history, even if it was not entirely accurate. The actual man was likely more concerned with the weather and the condition of the sails than with his public image or how he was remembered. The ships I commanded were fleet and a symbol of my rising power, equipped with the latest in naval technology and crewed by the bravest men of the age. The sheer size of this force allowed us to dominate the shipping lanes along the American coast, a dominance that was both feared and respected. We formed an alliance of pirates to blockade the port of Charlestown, South Carolina, and ransom its inhabitants, a coordinated effort that showed our ability to organize and lead a large group of men effectively. The alliance included several other pirate captains who shared my ambition and desire for plunder, men who operated under a loose confederation that allowed them to strike fear into merchants and colonial officials alike. Their combined strength made them a formidable force that could challenge the naval power of the British Empire, a force that could not be easily defeated. Yet the bonds of this alliance were fragile and often tested by greed and suspicion, the constant undercurrent of betrayal that ran through the pirate life. Rivals within the pirate community sometimes turned against one another when the spoils of war were divided, the promise of gold turning brothers into enemies in a single night. Despite these tensions, I maintained a reputation for loyalty to my closest associates and my crew, a reputation that kept them by my side through the storms and the battles. The quiet waters of the Outer Banks in the early 18th century reflected the pale light of a setting sun, casting a golden hue over the calm surface. Gentle waves lapped against the weathered hulls of abandoned fishing boats that rested on the sandy shore, their masts broken and their sails torn by the wind. Seagulls called softly to one another from the dunes, where the wind had shaped the grass into gentle ridges, a sound that echoed the solitude of the coast. The air smelled of salt spray and dried kelp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from a distant village that had long since fallen silent. A single lantern flickered in the window of a small cottage, casting a warm, amber glow onto the darkening beach, a solitary beacon in the vastness of the night. The tide moved slowly, erasing footprints in the wet sand with a rhythmic and soothing sound, a reminder of the constant cycle of the sea. Clouds drifted lazily across the horizon, painted in soft shades of violet and gray by the fading daylight, a canvas of the sky that changed with every passing hour. The sea remained calm, its surface like polished glass, mirroring the stillness of the twilight sky, a perfect reflection of the world above. No ships disturbed the horizon, and the only movement came from the slow swaying of the tall grass in the breeze, a dance of nature that continued without end. This peaceful scene stood in stark contrast to the violent history that had unfolded just beyond the dunes, a history that would soon be lost to the silence of the ocean. The final battle between my ship and Lieutenant Robert Maynard remains a subject of historical fascination and scholarly debate, a clash that ended my brief but impactful career. During the engagement, I lured the Royal sloops onto a sandbar where they temporarily ran aground, a tactical move that gave us the advantage of the moment. The pirate ship then unleashed a broadside with 8 cannons against Maynard's vessels after they ran aground. The sound of the ship rose from the depths like a ghost returning to claim its place in the world, a massive silhouette of timber and iron pulled slowly from the silt. We had named her the Queen Anne's Revenge, a title that sounded like a declaration of war against the very empire that hunted us. I remember the feeling of standing on that deck, the wood warm under my boots, the air thick with the smell of wet rope and the sharp tang of gunpowder that had never fully washed away. It was a vessel of immense power, equipped with 40 guns that could tear a merchant ship apart with a single broadside. The sheer size of this force allowed us to dominate the shipping lanes along the American coast, turning the ocean into our private domain. I saw the faces of the men who crewed her, over 300 souls bound by a loose confederation of greed and survival. They were not monsters in the way the stories later claimed, but men seeking a share of the world that had denied them a place. The alliance we formed was a fragile thing, held together by the promise of plunder and the fear of the British Navy. We moved as one, a flotilla of shadows that struck fear into the hearts of merchants and colonial officials alike. Their combined strength made us a formidable force, capable of challenging the naval power of the British Empire in these waters. Yet the bonds of this alliance were often tested by the slow erosion of trust and the sharp edge of suspicion. Rivals within our own ranks sometimes turned against one another when the spoils of war were divided, revealing the cracks in our foundation. Despite these tensions, I maintained a reputation for loyalty to my closest associates, a code that kept the ship running when the winds of fortune turned against us. The blockade of Charlestown remains one of the most daring and well-documented exploits of that time, a moment where the line between piracy and statecraft blurred. I watched as the ships of our fleet gathered in the harbor, their sails catching the morning light, creating a wall that the port could not ignore. We demanded ransom for the inhabitants, a bold move that showed our ability to organize and lead a large group of men effectively. The tension in the air was palpable, a static charge that made the hair on my arms stand up. The colonial officials trembled, their power suddenly insignificant against the weight of our cannons. This coordinated effort was a testament to the tactical skill I had honed over years of sailing the dangerous waters of the Atlantic. The capture of the Concorde near Martinique had been the pivotal moment that set us on this path, a prize that transformed a small sloop into a flagship. The renaming of that ship signified my intent to create a new identity and legacy, one that would outlast the fleeting nature of power in that dangerous world. The historical facts surrounding these events are well supported by both the written texts of the time and the physical evidence we left behind. The narrative of my life continues to captivate audiences through these scholarly and archaeological endeavors, weaving together the threads of fact and fiction. The work of historians and divers allows us to reconstruct the daily life aboard the vessel with greater accuracy than ever before. The physical evidence supports the written accounts found in the general history of the pirates, giving weight to the stories that were once dismissed as tall tales. The site serves as a tangible connection to the events that occurred in the waters off North Carolina, a place where history sleeps beneath the sand. Researchers work carefully to preserve the delicate balance between excavation and conservation, knowing that each artifact is a fragile piece of a larger puzzle. The process of uncovering history from the seabed requires patience and meticulous attention to detail, a slow dance with the ocean that reveals its secrets one by one. The artifacts recovered include personal items that belonged to the crew as well as naval equipment, each telling a small part of the larger story. These items help to humanize the figures, often portrayed as mere monsters in popular culture, showing the hands that held the ropes and the eyes that scanned the horizon. The historical record benefits from the combination of written texts and physical evidence, creating a more complete picture of the pirate era than either could provide alone. The legacy of my life endures through these combined sources of information, a testament to a time when the world was wild and the rules were written by the wind. The Queen Anne's Revenge remains a central focus of study for those interested in the golden age of piracy, a symbol of ambition, conflict, and eventual ruin on the Carolina coast. The ship's short tenure as a flagship highlights the fleeting nature of power in that dangerous world, a reminder that no empire, no matter how vast, can last forever. My transition to the adventure marked the final chapter of my life as a pirate, a retreat to the smaller, faster vessel that would carry me to my end. The quiet waters of the Outer Banks in the early 18th century reflected the pale light of a setting sun, a scene of deceptive calm. Gentle waves lapped against the weathered hulls of abandoned fishing boats that rested on the sandy shore, their paint peeling in the salt air. Seagulls called softly to one another from the dunes, where the wind had shaped the grass into gentle ridges, a rhythmic sound that soothed the mind. The air smelled of salt spray and dried kelp, carrying the faint scent of wood smoke from a distant village, a reminder of the lives being lived far from the sea. A single lantern flickered in the window of a small cottage, casting a warm, amber glow onto the darkening beach, a beacon of safety in the vast darkness. The tide moved slowly, erasing footprints in the wet sand with a rhythmic and soothing sound, a natural cycle that repeated without end. Clouds drifted lazily across the horizon, painted in soft shades of violet and gray by the fading daylight, a canvas of shifting colors. The sea remained calm, its surface like polished glass, mirroring the stillness of the twilight sky. No ships disturbed the horizon, and the only movement came from the slow swaying of the tall grass in the breeze. This peaceful scene stood in stark contrast to the violent history that had unfolded in these same waters just years before. The silence of the coast offered a sense of enduring calm that persisted through the changing seasons, a healing balm for the wounds of the past. The legacy of this era faded as the British Empire tightened its grip on colonial trade routes, bringing order to the chaos. New laws were enacted to punish piracy more severely, and naval patrols became more frequent and organized, sweeping the seas clean of outlaws. The golden age of piracy gradually gave way to a more regulated maritime environment under strict imperial control, a world where the rules were no longer written by the wind. My death served as a powerful symbol of the state's ability to project power into remote coastal regions, a final act of defiance that ended the reign of terror. The narrative of the Pirate King was eventually transformed into a cautionary tale for future generations, a story told to warn the young against the allure of the lawless life. Historians continue to examine the available documents to separate fact from the embellishments of contemporary writers, peeling back the layers of myth to find the truth. The story of Blackbeard remains a complex tapestry woven from historical truth and literary invention, a reflection of the anxieties and hopes of a society grappling with the challenges of expansion and order. The memory of those turbulent years persists in the cultural imagination of the modern world, a ghost that refuses to fade. Scholars work diligently to uncover the true details hidden beneath layers of myth and legend, ensuring that the historical context is understood with clarity and precision for future readers. The study of this period provides valuable insights into the social and political dynamics of the early 18th century, revealing how individuals navigated a world in flux, seeking opportunity amidst chaos and uncertainty. The historical record, though incomplete, offers a glimpse into the lives of those who lived on the margins of empire, men and women who sought their own path in a world that demanded conformity. The final battle between me and Lieutenant Robert Maynard remains a subject of historical fascination and scholarly debate, a clash that ended it all. During the battle, I lured the royal sloops onto a sandbar where they temporarily ran aground, a tactical move that seemed to promise victory. The pirate ship then unleashed a broadside with 8 cannons against Maynard's vessels after they ran aground, the thunder of the guns shaking the very air. Despite this tactical advantage, the Royal Navy forces eventually overwhelmed the pirate crew in a fierce hand-to-hand struggle, a brutal melee that left no room for mercy. The provided text does not contain information regarding the specific fate of my headless body after the battle at Ocracoke Inlet, leaving that final moment to the imagination. Some accounts suggest my body was thrown into the water while my head was displayed as a warning to other potential criminals, a grim reminder of the cost of defiance. The name Blackbeard became synonymous with the golden age of piracy in the popular imagination, a figure of terror and legend that outlived the man himself. My collaborators and rivals faded into obscurity, leaving only the legend of the man himself, a story that grows with every retelling. The historical record remains sparse regarding the personal connections that shaped my life, a silence that speaks as loudly as the cannon fire. I had no known family or apprentices who carried on my specific methods after my death, leaving the legacy to be shaped by others. The stories of my deeds were passed down through oral tradition and written accounts, often exaggerated to create a mythic figure that could not be killed by a single bullet. The sea remained calm, its surface like polished glass, mirroring the stillness of the twilight sky, a final piece for a life of storm. The bond we shared with our crew was forged in the salt spray and the shared risk of every horizon we chased. We moved as a single organism, guided by silent signals of flags and the precise timing of maneuvers under the cover of darkness. Survival depended on the skill of the sailors and the reliability of their equipment, for the sea offered no second chances. The sloop I commanded became a mobile base for our operations, a floating symbol of the power we had claimed for ourselves. I watched as the captured French vessel La Concorde transformed into my new flagship, Queen Anne's Revenge. The act of renaming and refitting was a declaration of identity and intent to the wider maritime community who watched from the shores. We stripped the old wood and replaced the guns, turning a merchant ship into an instrument of our will. This transformation showed our capacity to repurpose existing structures for new and aggressive ends. The alliance we formed with other pirates showed a political acumen that complemented our naval skills. These relationships were forged through mutual benefit and the shared understanding of the risks involved in our trade. We understood that unity was the only shield against the growing might of the empire. The blockade of Charlestown stands as a testament to our strategic vision and our ability to execute complex plans. The inhabitants of the port faced a unified front that demanded their attention and their resources. We held the harbor in a grip of iron while the sun rose slowly over the water. The resolution of the ransom involved careful negotiation and the maintenance of a credible threat of violence. We spoke with calm voices while our men stood ready with loaded muskets and cutlasses. The city surrendered without a shot fired, proving that fear could be a more effective weapon than lead. Throughout these events, the historical record remains silent on any personal artistic pursuits of my life. The focus of my days was the sea, the ship, and the crew that followed me into the unknown. The artistic representations of my life emerged long after my death and were shaped by the needs of storytellers. These later depictions often emphasized the dramatic elements of the legend over the mundane details of daily existence. The image of the pirate with the burning fuse became a staple of popular culture and visual art. This iconography served to distinguish me from other figures of the era and to cement a place in history. The actual man, however, was likely more concerned with the weather and the condition of the sails than with public image. The ships we commanded were built to withstand the harshest storms and the heaviest cannon fire. The sea remained calm, its surface like polished glass, mirroring the stillness of the twilight sky. No ships disturbed the horizon, and the only movement came from the slow swaying of the tall grass in the breeze. This peaceful scene stood in stark contrast to the violent history that had unfolded in these same waters just years before. The silence of the coast offered a sense of enduring calm that persisted through the changing seasons. The legacy of this era faded as the British Empire tightened its grip on colonial trade routes. New laws were enacted to punish piracy more severely, and naval patrols became more frequent and organized. The golden age of piracy gradually gave way to a more regulated maritime environment under strict imperial control. My death served as a powerful symbol of the state's ability to project power into remote coastal regions. The narrative of the Pirate King was eventually transformed into a cautionary tale for future generations. Historians continue to examine the available documents to separate fact from the embellishments of contemporary writers. The story remains a complex tapestry, woven from historical truth and literary invention. It reflects the anxieties and hopes of a society grappling with the challenges of expansion and order. The memory of those turbulent years persists in the cultural imagination of the modern world. Scholars work diligently to uncover the true details hidden beneath layers of myth and legend. Their efforts ensure that the historical context is understood with clarity and precision for future readers. The study of this period provides valuable insights into the social and political dynamics of the early 18th century. It reveals how individuals navigated a world in flux, seeking opportunity amidst chaos and uncertainty. The historical record, though incomplete, offers a glimpse into the lives of those who lived on the margins of empire. A single candle flickered in a brass holder on the mantel while the fire in the hearth crackled with a gentle and rhythmic sound. The air smelled faintly of beeswax and dried lavender that hung in bundles from the ceiling beams. Outside the window, the distant sound of the sea could be heard as the tide rolled in and out with a steady and hypnotic rhythm. The walls were adorned with simple tapestries depicting scenes of rural life and harvest that brought a sense of calm to the interior space. A large map of the known world hung on the far wall, showing the trade routes that connected England to the colonies and beyond. The map was drawn with care and precision, showing the coastlines and islands with a clarity that spoke of the importance of navigation. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light that entered the room, creating a slow and peaceful atmosphere that invited contemplation. The silence of the room was broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards or the soft ticking of a clock on the wall. This was a place of rest and reflection where the worries of the outside world were left at the door. The warmth of the fire provided a comforting presence that seemed to wrap around anyone who sat in the room. It was in such a place that a young man might have dreamed of adventure and the vast unknown of the ocean beyond the horizon. The stillness of the room offered a moment of peace before the storm of a life at sea began to unfold. The betrayal came not with a shout, but with a quiet shift in the wind. I had trusted the men who sailed under my colors, believing our bond was stronger than the law that hunted us. Yet the world changes, and the tide that lifts a ship can also drag it down to the depths. The governor offered a pardon, a piece of paper that promised safety in exchange for surrender. Some of the crew saw the writing on the wall and chose the safety of the shore over the danger of the deep. They left the ship in the night, slipping away like shadows into the quiet dark. I watched them go, feeling the weight of their absence settle heavily on the deck. The betrayal was a slow erosion of trust, a gradual crumbling of the foundation we had built together. I remained, clinging to the life I had known, hoping that the storm would pass and the sun would rise again. But the storm did not pass, and the sun rose on a world that had turned against me. The fleet that hunted me grew larger and more determined with each passing day. I knew that the end was approaching, yet I refused to turn back or to seek the safety of the pardon. The sea was my home, and I would meet my fate upon its waves rather than in a prison cell. The final days were a blur of tension and preparation, a countdown to the inevitable clash. I armed the ship and readied the crew, knowing that this would be the last battle. The silence before the fight was heavy with the knowledge of what was to come. We stood ready on the deck, the guns loaded and the cutlasses sharpened, waiting for the enemy to appear. The air was thick with the scent of gunpowder and the salt of the sea. I looked out at the horizon, seeing the shapes of the ships that would end my life. There was no fear, only a strange sense of acceptance as the moment approached. The battle was fierce and short, a chaotic dance of steel and fire on the rolling water. I fought with the strength of a man who had nothing left to lose, driven by the instinct to survive. The noise of the cannon and the shouting of the men filled the air, drowning out all other sounds. But eventually the noise faded, and the silence returned, heavy and absolute. I fell to the deck, my life bleeding out into the salt water, the story of Blackbeard coming to its abrupt end. The quiet waters off the coast of North Carolina now hold the silent secrets of a man who once commanded fear across the seas. The sun sets. The final chapter of that life unfolded under a sky that held no stars, only a heavy, bruising darkness pressing down on the water. I remember the taste of the air in those last hours, thick with the scent of wet rope and the metallic tang of fear that clung to the skin. The tide was low, exposing the muddy banks of the river, where the sloop Adventure had run aground. It was a quiet place, far removed from the roaring crowds of Charlestown or the open ocean where we had once ruled the waves. The silence was not peaceful but waiting, a held breath before the storm that had been building for months. My crew, once a force of 300 men, had dwindled to a handful of loyal souls who knew the weight of the law was closing in. We were tired, not just in our bones, but in the very marrow of our being. The constant running, the endless lookout watches, and the gnawing suspicion that the world had turned against us had worn us down to the core. I walked the deck one last time, my boots making soft, dull thuds against the wet planks. The ship listed heavily to one side, her timbers groaning under the strain of the mud that held her fast. It felt less like a vessel and more like a coffin already half buried. I thought of the French ship La Concorde, how we had taken her and renamed her Queen Anne's Revenge, filling her with 40 guns and a crew that seemed invincible. That was a different time, a time when the horizon promised only new opportunities and the wind always filled our sails. Now the wind was still, and the water was a mirror reflecting only the gray sky. The transformation of that French prize into a symbol of our power had been an act of creation, a declaration that we could reshape the world to our will. Yet, as I stood there, the reality was that we were merely passengers on a ship that had run out of road. The night before the end, we had anchored in the mouth of the river, hoping to slip away unnoticed. But the silence of the water is a liar. It carries sound over great distances, and the creak of our rigging had given us away. I knew they were coming. The naval forces under Maynard had tracked us through the dark waters, moving with a precision that spoke of training and purpose. We prepared for battle, not with the wild excitement of earlier raids, but with a grim, heavy resignation. The men checked their flintlocks and loaded their muskets with a slow, methodical rhythm. There was no shouting, no bravado. The air smelled of gunpowder and sweat, a sharp, acrid scent that filled the small cabin where I stood. I looked at the faces of my men, seeing the same fear I felt, but trying to mask it with a stoic calm. They were good men, loyal to a fault, and they deserved better than this muddy end. The morning broke with a mist that clung to the water, obscuring the world beyond a few yards. It was a perfect cover, or so we thought. The sloop Adventure was stuck fast in the sand, her hull exposed like the ribs of a great beast. We waited, the tension in the air so thick it was hard to breathe. Then the sound came, the rhythmic slap of oars cutting through the water, the soft creak of a different kind of ship approaching. It was Maynard's sloop, the Jane, moving with a silent purpose that chilled the blood. They did not fire immediately. They waited until they were close, until the mist parted enough to reveal the dark shapes of our cannons and the small band of men standing ready on the deck. The air grew cold, and the mist seemed to freeze around us. The battle began not with a roar, but with a sudden, violent clash of wood and iron. The Jane rammed into the Adventure, her bow crashing against our side with a sound that echoed through the hull. The impact shook the ship, sending splinters flying through the air. Men scrambled up the sides, swords drawn and muskets blazing. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of shouting, screaming, and the sharp crack of gunfire that drowned out the sound of the water. I fought my way to the deck, my sword heavy in my hand, the weight of it familiar and comforting. The air was filled with smoke, a thick gray cloud that stung the eyes and made it hard to see. I saw my men fall, one by one, their bodies crumpling onto the deck. There was no honor in this fight, only the desperate struggle for survival. The fighting was close and brutal, a melee of steel and flesh. I moved through the chaos, my sword finding its mark again and again. The smell of blood was strong, mixing with the scent of salt and smoke. I remember the face of a young man from the Jane, his eyes wide with fear as he raised his sword. I parried his blow and struck back, the motion fluid and automatic. The world narrowed down to the next swing, the next parry, the next breath. There was no thought of the future, no memory of the past, only the immediate reality of the fight. The deck was slick with blood and water, making every step a gamble. I could feel the fatigue in my arms, a deep ache that seemed to go down to the bone. And then the moment came. I was surrounded, cut off from my men, and the odds were impossible. The musket ball that struck me was not the end, but a signal that the fight was over. The sword in my hand felt heavy, and the world began to tilt. I fell to my knees, the cold deck pressing against my skin. The noise of the battle faded into a dull hum, replaced by the sound of the water lapping against the hull. I thought of the map of the world that hung in the cabin, the trade routes that connected England to the colonies and beyond. It was a map of a world I would never see again. The silence returned, a heavy, final silence that wrapped around me like a blanket. The historical record tells us that the final battle with Maynard concluded a career defined by boldness and notoriety. The facts are clear, yet the feeling of that moment is lost to the mists of time. What remains is the memory of the sea, the smell of the salt, and the sound of the wind in the rigging. The artifacts recovered from the wreck of the Queen Anne's Revenge now lie in a museum, silent testaments to a life that was lived at the edge of the world. The pile of concreted objects in the midships region holds many secrets yet to be revealed, but for me, the story is complete. The transition to the adventure marked the beginning of the end, and the final battle was the closing of the book. The legacy of the ship and its captain remains a significant part of the history of the coast, a story that continues to be told and retold. The careful work of preservation allows future generations to learn from these historical treasures, but the man who sailed her is gone, lost to the deep. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, casting a pale light on the water. The mist began to lift, revealing the shore and the ships that had taken my life. The battle was over, the fighting done, and the silence had returned. The sea was calm again, the waves lapping gently against the hull of the Adventure. The world moved on, indifferent to the life that had ended on that small patch of mud. The story of Blackbeard is now firmly rooted in both fact and the enduring power of historical memory. The Queen Anne's Revenge serves as a lasting symbol of the age of sail and piracy, a monument to a turbulent period in colonial history. The recovery of its contents ensures that the story of Teach will not be forgotten. But the silence that followed the final cannon shot did not last long, for the world above the water was quick to rewrite the story. Men in quiet rooms with ink-stained fingers began to spin tales that were far more terrifying than the truth I had lived. They took the fear I inspired and wrapped it in gold leaf, turning a man of simple survival into a monster of pure invention. The written accounts from those early years were often sold to curious crowds who wanted to believe in something larger than life. These writers exaggerated the length of my beard and the number of my crew to create an image that would sell books. The specific details of my time in Bath, where I sought a pardon under the protection of Governor Eden, faded into the background of folklore. People forgot the pragmatism that led me to run the Queen Anne's Revenge aground on a sandbar near Beaufort. They preferred the myth of the villain who could not be tamed, ignoring the strategic retreat that showed a man trying to survive. The physical remnants of my career lay dormant beneath the Atlantic Ocean for centuries, waiting for the right moment to speak again. It was not until 1996 that a private salvage company discovered the wreck while searching for a completely different vessel. This discovery provided tangible evidence that allowed historians to reconstruct the material reality of my life beyond the written word. The artifacts recovered from the site included cannons, navigational instruments, and personal items that offered a quiet glimpse into the daily existence of a pirate captain. These objects spoke of a life defined by constant movement and the precarious nature of survival at sea. The critical reception of my legacy evolved significantly as academic interest in maritime history grew during the 20th century. Scholars began to analyze the economic and social conditions that allowed piracy to flourish in the early 18th century. They viewed my actions not merely as random acts of violence, but as responses to the shifting political landscape of the British Empire. The romanticization of my character in popular culture often overshadowed the grim realities of my profession and the lives I ended. The quiet waters off the coast of North Carolina now hold the silent secrets of a man who once commanded fear across the seas. The sun sets slowly over the Atlantic, casting a golden glow upon the waves that once carried my ship. The seabed is soft with layers of silt and sand that have settled gently over the centuries. A single cannon rests on the ocean floor, its iron surface covered in a thick crust of marine growth. The water around it is clear and still, allowing light to filter down in shifting patterns of blue and green. Small fish dart in and out of the rusted metal, treating the relic as just another part of their natural environment. The silence of the deep ocean provides a peaceful contrast to the chaos that once occurred on the surface above. Time moves differently in these depths, where the past is preserved in a state of suspended animation. The wreck remains undisturbed, a quiet monument to a life that ended abruptly more than 300 years ago. The story of my life continues to unfold through the careful study of these submerged artifacts and the written records that survive. My legacy is no longer defined solely by fear, but by the complex interplay of fact and fiction that surrounds my name. The historical record remains incomplete, yet the fragments that exist offer a profound connection to a distant era. The narrative of my life invites reflection on the nature of memory and the power of storytelling to shape our understanding of the past. The quiet endurance of the shipwreck serves as a final testament to the man who once ruled the waves. The ocean keeps its secrets well, preserving the history of a pirate who became a legend long before his death. The legacy of Edward Teach endures as a testament to the enduring power of the human imagination to transform history into myth. Modern significance lies in the way the story continues to captivate the public imagination through films, literature, and tourism. The site of my death and the location of the shipwreck have become places of pilgrimage for those interested in the golden age of piracy. The narrative of my life serves as a reminder of the thin line between history and legend in the collective memory of society. The legacy of Edward Teach persists because it embodies the tension between lawlessness and the human desire for freedom from authority. The story was told and retold in ways that reflected the changing values of each new generation that encountered it. The men who hunted me received little recognition for their dangerous work, while the pirate became the hero of the song. History remembers the pirate more vividly than the men who brought him down. The mystery of the inner life remains as deep as the ocean I once commanded. Future generations will continue to search for clues about the man behind the beard. Until then, the silence of the archives preserves the secrets in quiet permanence. One specific fact about the wreck is that the lead sheathing on the ship's hull was removed before it sank, a deliberate act to salvage valuable material for reuse. This detail is often overlooked in the grand tales of battle, yet it speaks to the practical mind that managed the vessel. The lead was likely stripped by the crew or by those who found the wreck in the immediate aftermath, leaving the wood to rot in the salt water. It is a small, quiet testament to the value placed on simple materials in a world of constant need. The story of my life ends not with a resolution, but with a fading echo. The waves continue to roll against the shore, indifferent to the dramas of human history. The night falls gently over the place where I once walked and planned. Sleep comes easily to those who listen to the quiet rhythm of the sea. The sun has set on the golden age, and the stars now guide a different kind of traveler. There is nothing left to fight for, nothing left to claim. The sea has taken it all, and in taking it, has given it back